The fluorescent lights above the pediatric ICU flickered in a harsh, rhythmic pulse, casting cold reflections across the stainless steel equipment surrounding Evan Miller's hospital bed. The room wasn't loud, yet everything inside it felt unbearably intense. The steady beep of monitors, the faint hiss of oxygen, the low murmur of hurried voices outside the glass door. But to Sarah Miller, standing frozen beside her son with trembling hands pressed to her mouth, the world was collapsing in slow motion. Evan lay motionless beneath a tangle of tubes and wires, his small face pale under the white glare. Thick bandages wrapped around the top of his head, and a second dressing crossed his right thigh. His chest rose and fell rapidly, erratically, as if his body couldn't decide whether it wanted to keep fighting. Sarah's heart clenched every time his breath hitched. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, drowning out logical thought. He had been awake just hours earlier, exhausted, scared, but awake. Now, watching his eyelids flicker uncontrollably and his fingers twitch against the sheet, she felt a terror she didn't have words for. When the first alarm went off, it sounded almost delicate, a single high-pitched note slicing through the tension. Then came the second alarm, deeper, angry, urgent. The monitors surrounding Evan lit up with red and yellow warnings, as if screaming for someone to do something. Sarah gasped sharply and instinctively grabbed his hand. "Evan, baby? Evan, can you hear me? Please look at me." Her voice was shaking so hard it barely made it out of her throat. The glass door hissed open, and Dr. Jonathan Ramirez rushed in, still wearing his navy blue surgical scrub top from the earlier operation. His jaw was tight, his brow furrowed in concentration, and his gloved hands moved decisively toward the monitors. "What's happening?" Sarah cried, stepping aside only because a nurse gently pushed her back. "Why is he doing that? Why is he shaking?" "He's seizing," Dr. Ramirez said, his voice steady but strained. "We need to stabilize him now." Evan's small body began to jerk violently on the bed, his limbs stiffening and then trembling uncontrollably. Sarah felt the strength drain from her legs. She almost collapsed, clutching the rail of the bed for support. His face contorted in pain even though he was unconscious. Two nurses moved swiftly, one adjusting the four-line, the other securing Evan's shoulders so he wouldn't injure himself. The monitors kept screaming, their lights flashing wildly across the room, his heart rates crashing. One nurse said, "Get me the Ativan," Dr. Ramirez ordered. "Now!" Sarah pressed a trembling hand against the bandage on Evan's leg, as if touch alone could anchor him to the world. Her breaths came in short, uneven gasps, and her vision blurred with tears. "Please," she whispered, "please don't take him. Please, not my little boy. Doctor." Ramirez administered the medication, his hands steady despite the chaos swirling around him. Sarah saw him glance briefly at the heart monitor, and the subtle change in his expression, a flicker of fear, made her stomach twist violently. Evan's body jerked again, harder this time, his head snapping slightly to the side. The movement caused the edge of the bandage at his scalp to shift, revealing a small circular spot of swelling that seemed more pronounced now, rising and falling in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. That ripple, that sickening, unnatural ripple under his skin, like something inside him was trying to move. The sight triggered the memory she had been trying to suppress, the ultrasound image from earlier that afternoon. She hadn't meant to look at the screen, but her eyes were drawn to it, unable to look away once she understood what she was seeing. A shadow curled beneath Evan's scalp, long, curved, unmistakably alive. It wasn't imagination, it wasn't a muscle twitch, it wasn't fluid, it moved. The memory slammed into her with brutal force, and she gripped the edge of the bed to remain standing. The image felt seared into her brain, the creature trapped inside her son, writhing just beneath the surface of his skin. She had heard Dr. Ramirez's voice echoing in that small, dim imaging room. "That's not a cyst. That's not fluid. That's a living organism." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut now as the present blurred with the past. She could still feel the cold gel on Evan's head, the trembling of her hands as she held him still, the low gasp the ultrasound technician hadn't meant to let slip. The technician had silently stepped back, eyes wide, before running to call the attending physician. Sarah knew then, in her bones, that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Back in the ICU, Evan's seizure suddenly intensified. His back arched off the bed, his fingers locked into rigid claws, his face contorted in agony. Sarah screamed his name, but her voice broke halfway through. "His oxygen saturation is dropping," the nurse shouted. Push another dose, Dr. Ramirez barked. Prepare for possible intubation. No, 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 Sarah whispered, shaking her head frantically. He was okay. He was stable. What's happening to him? Dr. Ramirez didn't answer immediately. His hands flew from one monitor to another, adjusting settings, fixing leads, trying to regain control of a situation slipping through his fingers. When he finally spoke, it was quieter, though no less urgent. His body is reacting to the infection and the trauma from the extraction. His system is overwhelmed. Sarah felt something cold and heavy settle in her chest. Is he dying? Her voice cracked on the last word. We're doing everything we can, Dr. Ramirez replied, not looking away from Evan for a second. The alarms grew louder, more frantic. Evan's heart rate plunged again. The nurse monitoring the screen gasped softly before calling out the number as it dropped lower, lower. Sarah's legs buckled, and she clung to the side of the bed to stop herself from collapsing. Come on, Evan, Dr. Ramirez murmured under his breath, as if trying to will the boy back into his body. Stay with us, buddy. Stay with me. Another violent tremor racked Evan's small frame, then suddenly stopped. His limbs fell still. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the alarms. His chest wasn't rising. Doctor, the nurse said, her voice tight. Get the crash cart, Dr. Ramirez ordered. Sarah's vision tunneled as she watched them work. The room blurred. She could hear her heartbeat roaring in her ears like approaching thunder. Her fingers went numb. She thought she might faint, but she forced herself to stay upright. I want my baby, she whispered. Please, I want my baby back. Dr. Ramirez leaned over Evan, his hands moving with urgency and precision. He shouted for equipment, for doses, for suction. Evan's lips were growing pale. His eyelids fluttered once, just once, before falling still. For a brief moment, Sarah felt a horrifying calm, the kind that comes only when reality becomes too painful to comprehend. Her mind tried to protect itself by going blank, and then Dr. Ramirez's voice tore through the silence. We're losing him. The words shattered her. Sarah let out a sound she didn't recognize, a raw, primal cry ripped from a mother's soul. Nurses scrambled, equipment clattered, gloves snapped, and the room swarmed with frantic motion. Dr. Ramirez began chest compressions as the nurse prepared the intubation tube. Sarah pressed both hands against her trembling mouth to stop herself from screaming again. Her heart felt like it was being crushed from the inside. Tears streamed down her face and dripped onto the bed rail beneath her. Please, she sobbed. Please don't take him. Please don't take my son. But in that moment, with the monitor screeching and Dr. Ramirez fighting to pull Evan back, no one, not even God, seemed to answer. 4 days earlier, the morning had started with nothing more dramatic than the sound of cereal clinking into a bowl and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window in warm golden patches, lighting up the Miller family's small breakfast table. Evan Miller sat with his backpack already slung over one shoulder, kicking his legs under the chair in excitement. His brown hair, still damp from his hurried shower, fell into his eyes as he read over the field trip permission slip one more time, even though he'd already read it at least 10 times the night before. It's today, Mom, he said with a grin so wide it made his cheeks lift. The nature reserve trip. Miss Brooks said we might see real frogs, and snake skins, and maybe even fossils if we're lucky. Sarah smiled as she buttered a piece of toast for his little sister, Lily, who sat beside him swinging her feet. I know, sweetheart. You've only reminded me about 37 times. It was 38, Evan corrected with a giggle. Mike Miller, still in his fire department duty pants and undershirt, wandered into the kitchen with tousled hair and a half-awake expression. Who's counting anything before I've had coffee? He grumbled. You always say that, Evan said, smiling. But you still act awake when the fire alarm rings. That's different, Mike said, kissing the top of Evan's head before grabbing his mug. Alarms scream. You barely whisper. I do not whisper, Evan protested, puffing out his chest, and Lily laughed. The kitchen felt alive with the warm, ordinary rhythm of a family morning. Nothing hinted at the nightmare waiting just a few days ahead. Nothing hinted that in 4 days, Sarah would be standing in an ICU, praying for her son's life. At 8:10, Sarah zipped Evan's jacket and checked his backpack. Lunch, water bottle, notebook, inhaler. Everything was where it needed to be. She brushed a bit of lint from his shoulder. Stay with your group. Listen to Miss Brooks. Don't wander off. I won't, Evan promised. Lily tugged his sleeve. Bring me a rock. Only if it's legal to take, Sarah said immediately. I'll bring a picture of a rock. Evan corrected, ruffling his sister's hair. Lily seemed satisfied with that. At the front door, Mike gave Evan a gentle nudge. "Be brave, champ, and try not to chase wild turkeys again." "That was one time," Evan protested, "and they chased me." Sarah bent down and kissed his forehead. "Have fun, okay?" He grinned, slung his backpack fully onto his shoulder, and ran toward the yellow school bus idling at the curb. Sarah watched from the doorway as he climbed aboard, found a seat near the window, and waved with both hands. She waved back, her heart warm and full, the way mothers feel when their children are healthy, happy, and excited about the world. If she had known that something small, something she wouldn't even see, was about to slip into her son's life that very afternoon, she might have held him a little longer. The Lone Creek Nature Reserve stretched across nearly 150 acres of curated wilderness. Walking trails, marshes, a restored prairie, and a newly built tropical greenhouse imported from South America as part of an educational exhibit. It was the greenhouse everyone had been talking about. It had opened only 3 weeks earlier and was advertised as the Amazon Experience. Ms. Catherine Brooks stood in front of her class of 22 fifth graders, clipboard in hand, her smile bright but her eyes sharp. She had a reputation for being patient but strict, and the children respected her for both qualities. "Stay with your partner," she announced as they filed through the entrance of the reserve. "Hands to yourselves. Do not touch any plants unless a guide says it's okay, and absolutely no running." The class murmured yeses and promises, though several of them, including Evan, were vibrating with contained excitement. A young naturalist named Tyler greeted them at the Welcome Center. "We'll start with the prairie walk, then the marsh, and end at the greenhouse," he said. "Please remember everything in the greenhouse is imported, and some of the species are sensitive." Ms. Brooks nodded, and the children whispered among themselves. Sensitive plants sounded mysterious, almost magical. The prairie walk went smoothly. The marsh was a hit. Evan pressed his face close to the railing to spot tadpoles, while his friend Mason insisted he saw a snake tail flicker beneath a rock. But it wasn't until they reached the greenhouse that Evan felt his heart race with genuine excitement. The sliding glass doors opened, letting out a burst of warm, humid air. Inside, the greenhouse looked like a fragment of jungle abducted from another world. Towering ferns, vibrant orchids, vines climbing up steel beams, and the soft buzz of insects that seemed to hum in an alien rhythm. Evan stepped closer to a large, leafy plant shaped like a giant bowl. He leaned a little forward, squinting to see if water rested inside its petals. "Mom would love this," he muttered under his breath. He didn't notice the small rustle above him. Something fast and dark streaked downward, brushing through his hair with a faint buzzing sound. Evan flinched, startled, and swatted at his head. "Ow, hey!" Mason turned. "What happened?" "Some bug hit me," Evan said. "It felt weird. Probably just a moth," Mason shrugged. Evan nodded, but his fingers brushed the top of his scalp again. For a moment, the skin felt slightly warm beneath his hair, like something had landed there with more force than he expected, but there was no sting, no real pain, just a small lingering itch. He didn't see the tiny smear of moisture left behind where the insect made contact. He didn't see the microscopic egg sac embedded beneath his skin. Tyler continued talking about the greenhouse, his water filtration system, and the group moved on. Evan followed, still scratching the same spot on his head. By the time the field trip ended and the children climbed back onto the bus, the itch had subsided. Evan barely thought about it again. He spent the ride home showing Mason a picture he drew of a frog he saw in the marsh. When the bus pulled up to his stop, he sprinted down the steps and waved wildly at Sarah, who stood on the sidewalk waiting. "Did you see a snake?" she asked as they walked home. "No, but Mason thinks he saw one," Evan answered. "We saw a giant plant that looked like it could eat a whole hamburger, though." Sarah laughed. "Did you have a good time?" "It was awesome," Evan said, grinning. He didn't mention the bug. He didn't think it mattered. That was the kind of detail only hindsight turns into a warning. That evening, the Miller house glowed with its usual warmth. The dishwasher hummed softly in the background. Lily played with her dolls on the living room rug, and Sarah folded laundry on the couch while Evan sat cross-legged beside her, working on a drawing of the giant plant he'd seen at the nature reserve. Everything felt normal, comfortable, safe. It wasn't until Sarah reached over to brush Evan's hair out of his eyes that she paused. Her fingertips grazed the crown of his head and lingered on a tiny bump beneath the strands. It felt no bigger than a mosquito bite. "What's this?" she asked gently, parting his hair to get a better look. A bug hit me at the greenhouse, Evan said, not looking up from his sketchbook. It was really fast. Mason said it was probably just a moth. Sarah leaned in closer. The skin was slightly pink but not alarming. No scab, no open wound, just a little raised bump. She'd seen 1,000 like it during Evan's childhood. Bee stings, scratches, bug bites, scrapes from playground adventures. Does it hurt? She asked. Not really. Does it itch? A little, she nodded. Let's clean it just in case. Evan didn't argue, and Sarah dabbed a bit of antiseptic cream on the spot. He winced, but only from the coldness of the ointment. Then, just like that, the moment passed. She didn't think of it again when she tucked him into bed later that night. But 2 days after the field trip, everything started to change. It began on a quiet Saturday morning. The sky outside was bright and clear, the kind of morning that made the whole neighborhood come alive with the sounds of dogs barking and lawnmowers starting up. Evan wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his head with a small frown. "Mom," he said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "It still itches." Sarah, in the middle of pouring pancake batter, paused. "The bump? Yeah." Evan scratched again. "It feels weird, like something's tickling under it." The whisk in Sarah's hand went still. She forced a smile. "Probably healing. Sometimes skin itches when it's repairing itself." Evan nodded, accepting that explanation, but when he tilted his head and the overhead light hit his hair just right, Sarah glimpsed the bump again. It seemed a little larger, just a little. She brushed it off, for now. By afternoon, Evan had scratched the spot so many times Sarah had to take his hand away from his head more than once. "You'll make it worse," she warned. "Try to leave it alone." "I can't," Evan said, frustration creeping into his voice. "It feels like, he struggled for the right words. "Like something's moving." Sarah froze. "Moving?" Evan shrugged. "Just a little. Probably my imagination." She swallowed, trying to stay calm. Kids said strange things all the time. They confused sensations, exaggerated feelings, misunderstood normal body signals. She reminded herself that she had just told him the skin was healing. Maybe he was repeating her words back in his own way. Still, a sliver of unease crept into her chest. When evening came, Sarah checked the bump again. In the soft, warm glow of Evan's bedside lamp, she could see the skin stretched a bit tighter over it. It was still small, no bigger than a pea, but undeniably firmer. "Does it hurt when I touch it?" she asked, pressing gently around the area. "Only a little," Evan murmured sleepily. "Mostly it just feels itchy." She hesitated before asking, "Still feels like it's moving?" Evan pulled his blanket up to his chin. "Sometimes." Sarah forced a smile, kissed his forehead, and tucked the blanket around him. But when she stood up, her heart beat faster than usual. She told herself not to overreact, yet she couldn't ignore the nagging undercurrent of worry. The next morning, the bump looked the same size, but Evan was different. He barely touched his breakfast. He seemed tired, withdrawn, his eyes slightly shadowed. Mike noticed it too. "Buddy, you feeling okay?" he asked, ruffling Evan's hair. "Kinda tired," Evan replied, rubbing the bump again. "That thing still bugging you?" Mike asked. "Yeah." Mike crouched down, gently lifting the hair away from the bump. "Still looks like a bug bite to me," he said, then added jokingly, "Did a dinosaur mosquito get you?" Evan cracked a smile, but Sarah saw past it. Something was wrong. She decided to call the pediatric clinic. She expected them to tell her to come in. She expected the receptionist to hear the uncertainty in her voice. Instead, she got, "I'm sorry, we're booked. The earliest appointment is Thursday. That's 4 days away," Sarah said, gripping the phone tighter. "He's itching nonstop. And the bump hasn't gone down." "I understand, ma'am, but we're short-staffed this week. What am I supposed to do? If he develops a fever or the swelling spreads, take him to the ER." Sarah ended the call feeling more helpless than before. She hated the idea of the ER. The hours of waiting, the endless paperwork, the cold chairs, the giant bill afterward. But she also hated the thought of doing nothing. That night, things got worse. Evan woke up 3 times complaining that the bump felt hot. His fingers went automatically to the spot, scratching without him even realizing. At one point, Sarah had to gently pull his hand away in his sleep. The bump was warm beneath her touch, warmer than the rest of his scalp. By Sunday morning, the bump was unmistakably larger. Not dramatically, but enough that even Mike noticed immediately. Was it this big before? He asked Sarah quietly while Evan was brushing his teeth. No, she whispered. Not like this. Mike frowned, eyes narrowing. Maybe we should take him in today. And wait 8 hours in the ER? Sarah said, guilt flooding her chest as soon as the words left her mouth. What if it's nothing? What if we're overreacting? Mike exhaled slowly. What if we're not? Before she could answer, Evan called from the bathroom. Mom? His voice was small. It feels weird again. Sarah rushed in. Evan stood in front of the mirror, the toothbrush in his hand forgotten. His eyes looked wide, scared. What does it feel like? She asked, forcing calm. Like... He hesitated. Like something under there is trying to wiggle. Her stomach dropped. She knelt in front of him, taking his small face into her hands. Sweetheart, look at me. We're going to figure this out, okay? Evan nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. After she tucked him into bed that night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table long after the rest of the house had fallen asleep. She opened her laptop and typed into the search bar. Child bump on head won't go away. Itchy scalp bump moving sensation. Insect bite swelling getting bigger. The answers were useless or terrifying. Cysts, infections, allergic reactions, ingrown hairs, parasitic possibilities she refused to click on. She shut the laptop, rubbed her tired eyes, and whispered to herself, it's nothing. It has to be nothing. But deep inside, a cold fear settled. Quiet, persistent, undeniable. Something was beginning. And she didn't know yet that it would become the fight of their lives. By Monday morning, the bump on Evan's head had shifted from a curious inconvenience to an undeniable presence. Sarah noticed the way he moved more slowly as he got dressed, as if every motion required concentration. He wasn't his usual lively self. Instead of chattering about school or asking if he could bring extra snacks in his backpack, he stayed quiet, rubbing the back of his head. You sure you want to go to school today? Sarah asked as she tied his shoelaces. Evan hesitated. Yeah, he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. I don't want to miss recess. Mason said we're building a big fort today. Sarah forced a smile. Okay. But if you feel worse, you tell Ms. Brooks right away. Understand? He nodded and hugged her before heading out the door. But even his hug felt different, lingering, almost as if he didn't want to let go. The house felt heavier after he left. Sarah stood by the window long after the bus pulled away, watching the empty street as worry prickled beneath her skin like static. She pressed a hand to her chest, taking a deep breath. It's fine, she told herself. Kids get bumps. Kids get weird sensations. He's tired because he didn't sleep well. That's all. But deep down, the voice she tried to silence whispered, what if it's not all? When Evan returned that afternoon, Sarah knew immediately that something had changed. His shoulders slumped as he walked inside. He dropped his backpack on the floor and went straight to the couch without saying a word. He curled up, hugging a pillow to his chest. Hey, sweetheart, Sarah said gently, sitting beside him. Rough day? Evan didn't answer at first. He stared at the TV, off blank screen, too tired to even reach for the remote. Finally he whispered, it hurt today. Sarah blinked. Your head? He nodded, touching the spot gingerly. It kept throbbing. Like a headache? No. He paused, thinking. Like something pushing from inside. Her heart lurched. She brushed back his hair, her stomach tightening when she saw the bump was slightly larger again, the skin stretched taut and shiny. It wasn't huge, no bigger than a large grape, but it was undeniably swollen. Why didn't you tell your teacher? She asked. Evan shrugged weakly. I didn't want to go to the nurse again. Kids will think I'm weird. Sarah pulled him into a gentle hug, pressing her cheek to the top of his head. She could feel the warmth radiating off the swelling. It was warmer than the rest of him. Too warm. By evening, Evan barely touched his dinner. He pushed peas around his plate, his eyelids heavy. When Lily tried to make him laugh by placing a carrot stick across her upper lip like a fake mustache, Evan only gave a faint smile. After dinner, Sarah caught him in the hallway scratching so hard that his nails scraped his scalp. Evan! She grabbed his hand. You're hurting yourself. He looked up at her, startled, breathing fast. Tears suddenly welled in his eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, it's itchy. And it feels weird and... His voice broke. I don't like it. Sarah knelt and wrapped her arms around him. Hey, it's okay, you don't have to apologize. He shook against her. the way a child does when fear grows too big to hide. She rocked him gently, whispering soothing words even though she didn't feel soothed at all. Inside her chest, panic pulsed louder than her heartbeat. That night, Evan struggled to fall asleep. Sarah stayed in his room, sitting on the edge of his bed while he tossed beneath the blankets. Every few minutes, his hand would twitch up to his head, and she'd gently stop it. "It feels warm," Evan muttered at one point. "I know," Sarah said softly. "I'm keeping an eye on it. It feels alive." His voice cracked on the word, and Sarah froze. "Mom, what if something's under there?" Sarah swallowed hard. The urge to tell him he was imagining things was strong, almost automatic, but looking at his terrified eyes, she couldn't form the words. She didn't want to lie, not anymore. "We're talking to a doctor tomorrow," she said instead. "I promise. First thing." Evan nodded, but Sarah could tell the reassurance didn't reach him deeply enough to erase his worry. After he finally drifted into a restless sleep, Sarah stepped quietly into the hallway. Mike was coming up the stairs from the living room, his face etched with concern. "How is he?" he asked in a hushed tone. Sarah shook her head. "Not good," she whispered. "He says it feels like something's pushing, or moving." Mike exhaled slowly, leaning one hand against the wall. "Maybe it's an infection. A bad one." "I don't think so," Sarah said, her voice thin. "It's growing, Mike, and it's hot, and he's exhausted. Let's take him to the—" She hesitated. "What if they say it's nothing? What if we wait 8 hours just to be told the same thing the clinic said? That we're overreacting?" Mike stepped closer and cupped her shoulders. "Sarah, listen to me." His voice softened. "We know him. We know when something's wrong." Her eyes stung. She leaned into his chest. "I'm scared." "I know," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "We'll figure it out." But even as he said it, Sarah felt the dread swelling inside her. Just like the bump on Evan's head, something was wrong, something she couldn't name yet, but could feel looming, dark and inevitable. Before going to bed, she checked on Evan one more time. The moonlight filtered softly through his curtains, falling across his face. He looked fragile, too pale. The bump beneath his hair cast a faint, unnatural rise in his silhouette. Sarah reached out and brushed her fingers lightly over his cheek. "Mom," Evan murmured, barely awake. "I'm here," she whispered. "It hurts, I know." He swallowed. "Is it gonna go away?" Sarah paused. "Yes," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure. "We're going to make sure it does." He sighed, closed his eyes, and drifted back into uneasy sleep. Sarah watched him, her chest tightening until she could barely breathe. Something was happening inside her son, and this was only the beginning. The house was unusually quiet that night. Even the crickets outside seemed subdued, their usual chorus muffled under the thick Texas humidity. Sarah tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evan's frightened expression, the way he had whispered, "It feels alive." She lay staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound from his room across the hall. It was nearly 1 a.m. when she heard it, a faint whimper, not loud, not dramatic, but sharp enough to cut straight through her exhaustion and bolt her upright in bed. She waited, breath held, hoping she had imagined it. Then came another sound, this time a strangled gasp. Sarah threw back the covers and rushed into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. Mike stirred behind her but didn't wake. She pushed open Evan's door and found him sitting upright in bed, clutching his head, tears streaming down his face. "Evan," she whispered, hurrying to his side. "Baby, what's wrong?" "It hurts," he cried, voice trembling. "Mom, it hurts so much." She reached out, brushing his damp hair away from the bump, and froze. Even in the dim blue glow of the nightlight, she could see it. The bump wasn't just swollen, it was moving. A slow, rippling motion pulsed beneath the skin as if something underneath was shifting its weight, trying to find space. Sarah's breath caught. Her entire body went cold. "Oh my God." Evan gasped again, clawing at his scalp. "Get it out, get it out, get it out. Evan, stop." Sarah pulled his hands away, holding them tightly in hers as his small body shook with panic. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." He leaned forward, sobbing. "Mom, please, make it stop." Her heart felt like it was splitting open. Panic surged through her, hot and disorienting, but she forced herself to stay steady for him. She wrapped her arms around him, whispering soothing words she didn't believe. Then the bump moved again, sharper this time. A visible bulge pressed against the skin, traveling barely a centimeter before sinking back down. like a creature shifting beneath a thin layer of earth. Sarah's stomach lurched. She felt dizzy. The sight was unnatural in a way she couldn't comprehend, something that defied the logic of every scrape, bruise, and fever she'd nursed Evan through since he was born. She reached instinctively for her phone on his nightstand, hands trembling as she dialed 911. Her voice shook so violently she could barely form the words. "My son. There's something wrong with my son's head. It's swollen, and he's in pain. It's moving." She choked on the last word, feeling ridiculous, terrified, desperate all at once. The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly. "Is he conscious?" "Yes." "Is he breathing normally?" "He's crying. He's in pain." "Stay with him, ma'am. An ambulance is on the way." Evan's breathing became fast and shallow. He pressed his forehead against her chest, his small hands trembling as he held onto her shirt. Sarah tightened her arms around him, her own tears finally spilling. "It's okay," she whispered, even though everything inside her screamed that it wasn't. "You're going to be okay. Help is coming." A moment later, Mike stumbled into the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "What's—" He saw Evan shaking in Sarah's arms, saw her pale face, saw the panic filling the room. "Sarah, it moved," she whispered hoarsely. "Mike, it moved." Her husband stared at her, confused. "What do you mean, it moved?" She pointed with a shaking finger. "Look." Mike knelt beside the bed, gently pushing aside Evan's hair. His eyes widened immediately. The bump throbbed beneath his fingers like a heartbeat that didn't belong there. "Jesus," he muttered. Another ripple traveled across the swelling. Mike jerked back in shock, then looked at Sarah. "Call someone." "I already did." Her voice cracked. "They're coming." Evan whimpered again, eyes squeezed shut. "It's crawling, Mom. Please make it stop." Those words shattered her. She rocked him back and forth as tears dripped into his hair. When the ambulance finally arrived, the flashing red lights from the driveway lit Evan's room in harsh streaks that made everything feel even more surreal. Lily appeared groggily in the hallway, rubbing her eyes, confused and scared, but Mike gently guided her back to her room, promising to explain later. The paramedics entered quickly, speaking in calm, controlled tones. One of them was a woman with kind eyes who knelt beside Evan and placed a reassuring hand on his back. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "We're going to help you, okay?" Evan nodded weakly, his grip on Sarah's shirt loosening only slightly. The paramedics examined the bump. Their expressions stiffened. Sarah saw it the moment they realized this wasn't a typical medical call. "What is that?" one whispered to the other. "I don't know," he replied under his breath. "But we need to move now." They lifted Evan onto the stretcher, securing him gently. Sarah stayed at his side the whole time, gripping his hand as if letting go would mean losing him entirely. Inside the ambulance, as the siren wailed through the night, Evan moaned softly, drifting in and out of awareness. Sarah pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "I've got you. I've got you. Nothing is going to take you from me." But as she said it, she couldn't shake the memory of the way the bump had rippled. Slow, deliberate, alive. Something was inside her son, and tonight was just the beginning of the nightmare. The emergency room was already overflowing when the paramedics wheeled Evan through its automatic doors. Harsh fluorescent lights illuminated a sea of exhausted faces, parents clutching feverish toddlers, elderly patients in wheelchairs, teenagers scrolling on their phones with bloody towels pressed against their foreheads. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and stress. Nurses moved quickly, but with the weary rhythm of people stretched too thin. Sarah stayed by Evan's side as the stretcher came to a stop near the triage station. His eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow, the bump on his head pulsing faintly beneath the harsh light. She brushed sweat from his hairline and whispered, "We're here, baby. They're going to help you now." But the nurse at triage barely glanced up. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her shoulders tense, dark circles etched beneath her eyes. "Name?" she said, typing rapidly. "Evan Miller," Sarah answered. "He's in severe pain, his head is swollen and—" She hesitated, not knowing how to say it. "It moved." The nurse paused just long enough to look skeptical. "Moved? Yes," Sarah insisted, her voice trembling. He woke up screaming. "Something is wrong." "We'll check him in," the nurse replied mechanically. "Please have a seat." "A seat?" Sarah repeated, staring at her in disbelief. "He needs a doctor now." "There are 12 patients ahead of you," the nurse said. "We'll call you as soon as we can." Sarah felt heat rise in her chest. My son is in extreme pain. Something is happening under his skin. He needs help immediately." The nurse sighed, clearly overwhelmed. "Ma'am, we're doing our best. If his condition worsens, come back to the desk." Sarah nearly screamed. "It is worsening." Mike placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Sarah," he murmured, though his jaw was clenched tight with anger. "Let's sit. Let's just stay near him." They found 2 seats together, though Mike had to stand because the stretcher didn't fit neatly into the cramped waiting area. He kept one hand on Evan's leg, grounding him. Sarah sat beside the stretcher, holding Evan's small limp hand in both of hers. Minutes crawled by, then half an hour, then almost an hour. Every time Evan whimpered, Sarah's heart clenched painfully. At one point he whispered, "Mom, it's hot," and she touched the bump. It burned beneath her fingers. She felt sick. Mike approached the triage desk again. "Please," he said, his voice lower now, controlled but desperate. "My son needs help. He's getting worse. The nurse didn't even need to check the board. We still have a wait. A doctor will see him as soon as possible." Sarah wanted to grab the woman by the shoulders and shake her. Didn't she understand? Didn't she hear Evan crying? Didn't she see the fear in his eyes? Evan shifted on the stretcher, whimpering again. His fingers twitched toward his scalp. "It's pushing," he whispered. "Mom, it feels like it's trying to get out." Sarah tightened her grip around his hand. I know, sweetheart. I'm here." A man across the room looked over, frowning. A mother holding a toddler stared with pity. But no one could help them. No one would. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a young doctor in scrubs emerged from a hallway and called out, "Miller family?" Sarah jumped to her feet, nearly tripping over her own shoes as she helped wheel Evan toward him. The doctor's eyes were tired, but when he saw Evan, something sharpened in his expression. "What's going on tonight?" he asked, guiding them into an exam room. Sarah tried to summarize, her words tumbling over each other, Evan's pain, the swelling, the movement. The doctor listened, frowning more deeply with each detail. When she finished, he gently parted Evan's hair to examine the swelling. The moment his fingers pressed near the bump, it rippled. The doctor jerked his hand back instinctively. His eyes widened. "Okay," he said under his breath. "That's not normal." Sarah felt a cold chill run down her spine. Mike stood rigid beside her. The doctor cleared his throat. "I'm ordering an ultrasound. Now." Sarah nearly collapsed with relief. Finally, someone believed her. Someone saw what she saw. But as they wheeled Evan toward imaging, Sarah couldn't shake the dread growing inside her. Whatever was happening under his skin wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating, and the nightmare was far from over. The hallway leading to the imaging department felt colder than the rest of the ER, as if the air itself sensed what was about to be uncovered. Sarah walked beside Evan's stretcher, her hand gripping his so tightly her knuckles were turning white. Evan lay silent now, his eyelids fluttering, his breathing shallow. Mike trailed behind them, tense, restless, his fists clenching and unclenching, as if he were preparing to fight something he couldn't see. A technician in pale blue scrubs greeted them at the door. She looked young, maybe only a few years out of training, but the uncertainty in her eyes betrayed how overwhelmed she already felt tonight. "We'll take a look and see what's going on," she said gently, though her voice quivered at the end. Sarah nodded, though she didn't trust her own voice enough to speak. She helped guide Evan onto the narrow imaging bed, brushing his hair softly away from his forehead. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "We're right here." He blinked up at her, exhausted. "Does it hurt?" he asked the technician. "Just a little cold gel," the woman said, forcing a reassuring smile. "You'll be okay." She squeezed gel onto her fingers and spread it across the swollen area on Evan's scalp. Evan flinched at the sudden chill, his small body tensing. The technician lifted the ultrasound probe and lowered it onto his head. The screen flickered to life. At first, there was only static, the grainy gray and black haze typical of ultrasound images. The technician adjusted the controls, narrowing the depth, sharpening the contrast. Then something shifted on the screen, a shadow, a distinct oval-shaped mass beneath the skin. Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What is that?" she whispered. The technician didn't answer. She leaned closer, narrowing her eyes, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the probe again. The image sharpened further. The shape moved. Not a twitch, not a pulse, a deliberate, unmistakable wriggle. The technician gasped, her hand jerking back so suddenly the probe slid off Evan's scalp. "Oh my God!" Mike stepped forward. What? What do you see? The technician swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. Without taking her eyes off the monitor, she whispered, That's not fluid. Sarah's breath caught. Then what is it? Before the technician could reply, the door swung open and Dr. Ramirez stepped inside, still in his scrubs, his expression sharp and focused. I came as soon as I heard. What do we have? The technician retrieved the probe with shaky hands and placed it back on Evan's scalp. The screen lit up again, and there it was, a living organism, curled, segmented, nestled deep beneath the skin, and moving, not weakly, not randomly, but with purpose, as if disturbed by the pressure of the probe. Sarah covered her mouth, a strangled cry escaping against her palm. Mike's face drained of color, his jaw tightening in disbelief and horror. Dr. Ramirez leaned in closer, his voice low, controlled, but tinged with alarm. That's a larva. Sarah blinked rapidly, shaking her head as tears blurred her vision. A larva? Inside his head? Dr. Ramirez didn't look away from the screen. It appears so, Evan whimpered, and Sarah rushed to his side, stroking his cheek. It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. Mommy's here. The technician stepped back, visibly shaken. I've never seen something move like that before. Dr. Ramirez exhaled slowly through his nose, his mind already racing. This isn't a normal parasitic case. It's too large. And the movement, he cut himself off, eyes narrowing as the creature curled and uncurled, pushing faintly against the thin layer of tissue containing it. Sarah felt her knees weaken. You can get it out, right? You can fix this? Dr. Ramirez looked at her, steady but grave. We're going to try, but this needs to happen now. The larva wriggled again on the screen, clearer this time, its hooked mouthparts scraping against the surrounding tissue. Sarah gripped Evan's hand tightly. Something was inside her son, and it was alive. The operating room felt impossibly cold when they wheeled Evan inside. Harsh white lights overhead cast long reflections across the steel trays and glass monitors, making the room seem brighter than any place should be at this hour of the night. Sarah walked beside the gurney until the very last moment, her fingers locked around Evan's hand, unwilling to let go. Mom, Evan whispered, barely audible. Will it hurt? Sarah leaned down, kissing his forehead as tears slipped down her cheeks. No, sweetheart, you're going to sleep. You won't feel anything. I promise. His eyes fluttered, searching her face. Stay, please. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered, though the nurses were already gently guiding her back toward the door. Doctor. Ramirez stepped between them, crouching so he was eye level with Evan. His voice was steady, warm, but edged with urgency. Hey buddy, I'm going to take care of you. We're going to get that thing out. Okay? Evan nodded weakly. Sarah felt her heart break as the anesthesiologist reached for the mask. She mouthed, I love you. But before she could say it aloud, Evan's eyes drifted closed. The doors slid shut, and she was left standing alone in the hallway, staring through a small window as Dr. Ramirez snapped on his gloves and the surgical team prepared for the impossible. Inside the OR, the tension was immediate. Evan lay still beneath the blue drape, only the top of his head exposed. The bump was swollen and taut, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. Scalpel, Dr. Ramirez said quietly. The nurse handed it over with gloved precision. Ramirez made the incision with careful, deliberate movements. Sarah, watching from the window, felt her breath catch. As a thin line of fluid seeped out, a nurse dabbed it away. Then something shifted beneath the cut. A sudden ripple. Ramirez froze for half a second. It's reacting, he muttered. He widened the incision just enough to expose the pocket beneath the skin. A glistening segment of pale flesh squirmed upward, recoiling from the light. The larva. Even through the glass, Sarah could see it. Fat, translucent, horrifyingly alive. It twisted violently as Ramirez reached for forceps. Hooked in deep, he murmured. Flush. A nurse handed him a syringe of saline. When Ramirez injected it around the cavity, the larva writhed harder, its dark mouth hooks scraping against tissue. Evan's body twitched on the table despite the anesthesia. Easy, easy, Ramirez whispered under his breath, as if speaking to the creature itself. With a slow, steady pull, he clamped the forceps around the center of the larva. It resisted. Sarah covered her mouth, her knees weak, tears blurring her vision. Come on, Ramirez breathed. And then, with a wet suction sound, the larva slid out, thick and curled, still wriggling angrily in the forceps. The nurse dropped it into a specimen jar, where it writhed in the clear fluid like something summoned from a nightmare. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ramirez finally exhaled. "It's out!" Sarah sank to the hallway floor, sobbing with relief. Inside the jar, the creature continued to twist, alive, hungry, and freshly removed from her son. When the double doors of the operating room finally swung open, Sarah sprang to her feet so quickly she nearly lost her balance. Dr. Ramirez stepped out first, pulling off his gloves, exhaustion carving new lines into his face. For a heartbeat, Sarah didn't breathe. She couldn't. "It's out," he said gently. "Your son is stable." The words washed over her like warm light, softening her legs until she had to steady herself against the wall. Mike exhaled shakily beside her, rubbing a trembling hand over his face. Sarah covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling fast and hot. "Can we see him?" she whispered. "In a little bit," Ramirez said. "He's waking up now. We're monitoring him closely." Sarah nodded rapidly, desperate, grateful, anything to keep from collapsing in relief. When they were finally allowed into the recovery room, Evan lay small and pale against the white sheets, a fresh bandage covering the top of his head. His eyelids fluttered open at the sound of their footsteps. "Mom?" he murmured, voice thin. Sarah was beside him in an instant, pressing his hand to her cheek. "I'm here, baby, you're okay. They got it out." Evan blinked slowly, as if trying to process the words. "It's gone?" "It's gone," Mike said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You're safe now." A tiny smile tugged at the corner of Evan's mouth. His breathing steadied, and his body seemed to relax for the first time in days. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, afraid to let go of his hand, afraid that if she blinked, he'd disappear. For a little while, everything felt lighter. Nurses moved quietly around the room, adjusting monitors and checking fluids, but there was no more panic in the air, just a quiet hum of routine. Sarah allowed herself to breathe deeply for the first time since this nightmare began. She brushed Evan's hair gently away from his forehead, feeling only warmth from the bandage, not the terrible pulsing heat she'd felt before. Later, when Evan drifted off to sleep again, Sarah stepped into the hallway where Mike waited with 2 cups of vending machine coffee. He handed her one, and she sank beside him on the bench. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I think so," she said, though her voice trembled. "I keep seeing it. The way it moved." Mike nodded, staring down at the floor. "I can't believe something like that was inside him." A nurse walked past them carrying a stainless steel specimen jar. Sarah caught a glimpse through the glass, a pale, curled body floating inside, its small hooks still visible even in death. She shuddered violently. "At least it's over," Mike whispered, placing an arm around her. Sarah leaned into him, closing her eyes. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe this chapter of terror had finally ended. But somewhere deep inside her, beneath the relief, beneath the exhaustion, a faint, inexplicable unease stirred, a feeling that something wasn't over at all, a feeling that the nightmare had only just begun. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the monitor beside Evan's bed. After the surgery, he drifted in and out of sleep, his breathing slow but steady. Sarah kept vigil beside him, her fingers tracing circles on the back of his hand. For the first time in days, the weight pressing down on her chest had loosened. She even allowed herself to imagine the moment she would finally take him home. It was nearly midnight when Evan stirred again. Sarah leaned forward quickly. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" He blinked, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. "My leg hurts," he whispered. Sarah's brows knitted. "Your leg?" Evan nodded weakly and lifted a trembling hand toward his right thigh. "It feels like before, the words sliced through her like a blade. She pulled the blanket back carefully. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the pale skin of his thigh under the fluorescent light. But then something caught her eye. Just above his knee, the skin rose in a small, round mound. A swelling, red, warm, almost identical in shape to the original bump on his head. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, as if denial alone could erase it. "No, no, no." Evan winced. "It's itchy, like the other one." Sarah's throat tightened until she could barely breathe. She pressed her fingers lightly around the swelling, and Evan flinched. "I'm sorry," she murmured, pulling her hand back quickly. Tears welled in her eyes. "When did it start hurting?" "After dinner," Evan whispered. "I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to worry you. Oh, baby. Her voice cracked into a sob. You can tell me anything, anytime. Mike entered the room with 2 cups of vending machine tea, but the moment he saw Sarah's face, pale, frozen, he stopped. What happened? Sarah pointed with shaking hands. It's happening again. Mike rushed to the bedside. When he saw the bump, his expression twisted into disbelief and horror. You've got to be kidding me. Evan looked between them, frightened. Am I sick again? Sarah wiped her tears quickly, forcing her voice to be steady, even though her hands were trembling uncontrollably. We don't know yet, sweetheart, but we're going to help you. I promise. She pressed the call button. Her finger shook so badly she nearly missed it. A nurse arrived within seconds, her expression instantly tightening when she saw the swelling. ILL page Dr. Ramirez, she said. Minutes later, Dr. Ramirez entered the room, his face grave. He approached the bed and examined the bump without a word. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, he exhaled slowly. It appears there may be another one. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. How? You removed it. You said it was the only one. I said it was the one we could see, Ramirez corrected gently. Larvae can be deposited in clusters. It's rare, but it happens. Evan whimpered softly. Is there something inside me again? Sarah gathered him into her arms, tears spilling freely now. We're going to take care of you, she whispered. No matter how many times it takes. But this time, even as she said it, she felt the ground beneath her hope begin to crack. Because the nightmare hadn't returned. It had never left. The second surgery happened faster than anyone could prepare for. Within minutes of examining the growing lump on Evan's thigh, Dr. Ramirez called for an emergency. There was no waiting this time, no delays, no triage lines or clipboards. The urgency in his voice cut through every hallway like a blade. Sarah stayed beside Evan as they rushed him toward the operating room again. His small fingers clung weakly to hers, his breath quick and shallow. His cheeks were pale, and sweat glistened at his hairline. Mom, he whispered, I don't want it inside me again. Sarah's heart broke. She squeezed his hand tighter. We're going to get it out, baby, I promise. You're so brave. Mike walked on the other side of the gurney, jaw clenched, barely speaking. Rage simmered beneath his shock. Rage at the school, the nature reserve, the healthcare system, the sheer impossibility of what was happening to his son. But fear swallowed all of it the moment he looked at Evan's face. Inside the OR prep room, the nurses worked with swift precision, attaching leads, prepping the anesthesia mask. Evan's eyes darted between Sarah and Mike, pleading silently for reassurance. Sarah leaned down, cupping his cheek. Right here, she whispered. We're right here. The anesthesiologist lowered the mask, and Evan's lashes fluttered. He drifted away again, his tiny body relaxing as sleep swallowed the fear etched into his face. As soon as the doors closed behind him, Sarah's legs nearly buckled. Mike caught her, holding her tightly as she sobbed into his chest. He's just a kid, she cried. He's just a little boy. I know, Mike whispered, though his voice cracked. I know. They waited outside the OR again, but this time the fear was sharper, because this wasn't an isolated issue anymore. The first larva had been horrifying enough, but a second, in another part of his body, something bigger was happening. Inside the OR, Dr. Ramirez wasted no time. He opened the swollen area on Evan's thigh with a careful incision, but the larva inside reacted instantly. The skin rippled in a wave, and the creature curled violently inside the small cavity it had carved for itself. This one was smaller, younger, but far more aggressive. The mouth hooks latched onto the surrounding tissue, making extraction harder. Flush, Ramirez ordered. Saline flooded the wound, and the larva thrashed. Ramirez gripped it firmly with forceps, slowly peeling its hooks from Evan's tissue. It resisted, twisting with a disturbing will to survive. Finally, it slipped free with a slick tug, writhing angrily as it dropped into the specimen cup. Ramirez exhaled. 2 larvae, in the same host. This isn't chance. He sealed the sample personally. This needed to be escalated. When the surgery ended, Mike and Sarah were brought into a consultation room. The harsh hospital lighting made everything feel sterile, unreal. Dr. Ramirez entered, still in his surgical cap, dark circles beneath his eyes. Sarah stood immediately. Is he okay? He's stable, Ramirez said gently. He's waking up now. The second larva was smaller, easier to remove. He hesitated, then continued. But this changes things. Mike's voice hardened. What does that mean? Ramirez placed the sealed specimen container on the table. The larva floated inside, curled, pale, horrifying. 2 larvae from the same host means the insect that infected him likely laid multiple eggs. That's extremely rare for this species. And even more concerning. He picked up the jar, turning it slightly. This larva matured far faster than expected. Too fast. That suggests a mutation or bacterial involvement. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. A mutation? I've already contacted the Centers for Disease Control, Ramirez said. They are sending a team to investigate. The air in the room thickened. The CDC, Mike repeated. Is this serious enough for them? Ramirez nodded grimly. I believe so, and they do too. As if on cue, 2 officials in dark jackets stepped into the hallway outside, badges hanging from lanyards. A woman with sharp eyes and a calm, commanding presence approached the room. Dr. Ramirez? She asked. He stood. Dr. Grant, thank you for coming. Sarah's stomach twisted. This was real. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a freak encounter. This was something bigger, something dangerous enough to pull in the CDC at midnight. Dr. Melissa Grant stepped inside, offering a gentle nod to Sarah and Mike. We're here to help, she said softly, and to find out where this came from. Her calmness didn't soothe Sarah, it terrified her. Calm was what officials used when they were hiding how bad something really was. Grant examined the specimen, her brow tightening. We've seen botfly larvae before, she murmured, but never like this. Never with this growth rate. She turned to Sarah. Mrs. Miller, do you know of anything unusual Evan came into contact with recently? Any travel, any exotic animals, any foreign environments? Sarah felt the color drain from her face. The school field trip, she whispered. The greenhouse. The tropical exhibit. Grant exchanged a loaded look with Ramirez. We'll need to visit it. In that moment, it no longer felt like Evan was the only one at risk. This was bigger, wider, darker, and Evan's infection was only the beginning. The hours following the second surgery felt even heavier than the hours leading up to it. Evan slept under the soft, rhythmic beeping of the monitors, his small chest rising and falling beneath the hospital blanket. Sarah sat beside him, gripping his hand with both of hers, terrified to let go, terrified to blink. The fear that had begun as a whisper now roared inside her like a storm. Dr. Grant and her team stepped quietly into the room, their presence both reassuring and suffocating. Grant approached Sarah gently. Mrs. Miller, we need to run a full body scan on Evan, she said, just to be absolutely sure there are no other larvae present. Sarah's breath caught. You think there could be more? We can't assume there aren't, Grant replied softly. 2 larvae suggest a cluster. We must rule out the possibility of a third. Mike cursed under his breath, pacing toward the window, raking his hands through his hair. How many? How many could be inside him? Grant didn't answer, and her silence was more terrifying than any prediction. They wheeled Evan toward radiology, while Sarah walked beside him, barely breathing. Evan stirred once, blinking up at her with glassy eyes. Are they doing the thing again? He whispered. No surgery, Sarah said quickly, brushing his hair from his forehead. Just pictures, sweetheart. They're just taking pictures inside your body. Evan nodded weakly. Do I have another one? Tears stung her eyes, but she forced a smile. We're checking, okay? That's all. Just checking. Inside the scanning room, the humming machine loomed like some enormous, metallic beast. The technician was gentle, quiet, careful not to frighten Evan. Sarah stood behind the glass window, hands pressed to the cold surface, her heart hammering violently as Evan was slid into the machine. The scan illuminated the screen in shades of gray. Dr. Grant and Dr. Ramirez leaned in, their eyes scanning every inch of the image. The skull, the spine, the torso, arms, legs every second. Felt like an hour. Sarah couldn't read the patterns and shadows on the monitor, but she searched their faces desperately for answers. Then Ramirez inhaled sharply. Sarah's legs weakened. What is it? Ramirez didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved rapidly across the screen as Grant zoomed in on one of the images. For a moment, Sarah thought she might faint. Finally, Grant exhaled and shook her head slowly. It's scar tissue, she said. Leftover inflammation from the infections. Sarah sagged against the wall, her body trembling with relief so sharp it almost hurt. Mike closed his eyes and pressed a hand to his forehead. So, "No more?" Sarah breathed. "No more," Grant confirmed. "At least not at this time." Sarah rushed back to Evan's side as they slid him out of the machine. She kissed his forehead, her tears dripping onto his skin. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're okay." But as they wheeled him back toward his room, she noticed how pale he still was, how his body seemed smaller beneath the bulky blankets, how the faint scars on his head and thigh looked like warnings carved into flesh. Relief washed through her, but beneath it, deep and persistent, a current of dread remained, because something still didn't feel over, and a mother's instinct is rarely wrong. Evan slept through most of the morning, his body exhausted from surgeries and scans. The room was finally quiet, the beeping of the monitors soft and steady. For the first time in days, Sarah let herself lean back in the chair, exhaling shakily as the tension in her shoulders slowly released. But peace never lasted long in a hospital. A knock sounded at the door, followed by a social worker carrying a clipboard. She gave a sympathetic smile, the kind that tried to soften whatever bad news she was about to deliver. "Mrs. Miller? Mr. Miller? I need to go over your billing summary." Sarah felt her stomach clench. Mike straightened, crossing his arms. "Already? It's standard for cases involving emergency surgery and specialist consultation," the social worker said. "The billing department wanted me to walk you through the initial charges." She handed them a printed sheet, and Sarah's breath immediately caught. $14,800 for emergency surgery, $5,600 for overnight ICU monitoring, $3,250 for radiology and full-body imaging, $1,950 for pathology analysis, $2,000 for specialist consultations. The total glared up at her. $28,600. Sarah stared, unable to blink. This must be a mistake." "I'm afraid not," the woman said softly. Mike stepped forward, his voice sharp. "We have insurance." "Yes," she replied carefully. "But your plan has a high deductible, and they've flagged some of the charges as non-essential urgent care pending review." Sarah's mouth fell open. "Non-essential? They pulled a living parasite out of my son's head." "I know," the woman said, lowering her voice, "but insurance companies often categorize emergency procedures differently. They may require proof the surgeries were medically necessary." Mike scoffed. "Proof? Should we mail them the larva?" The woman didn't laugh. She simply handed them another sheet. "You can appeal once the full report is finalized." Sarah sank into the chair, the paper trembling in her hand. She felt sick. They were fighting for Evan's life, and now they had to fight the system too. As the woman left, Dr. Ramirez stepped into the room with a somber expression, as if he already knew what conversation had taken place. "You got the bill," he murmured. Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "How is any family supposed to pay this?" Ramirez sighed deeply. "They shouldn't have to, but this is the reality. We lose patients every year because parents delay bringing their children in, not because they don't care, because they're afraid they can't afford it." Sarah's heart cracked. "We waited too long. We kept telling ourselves it was nothing." Ramirez pulled a chair beside her. "You did what most families do. You hoped it would go away. You trusted the system to make space for you. But the truth is, our system is broken, overwhelmed, understaffed, and expensive in all the worst ways." Sarah wiped her cheeks, her voice trembling. "If we waited even one more night," Ramirez nodded solemnly, "he wouldn't have survived." The weight of that truth pressed on her like a mountain. She reached for Evan's hand again, lacing her fingers through his tiny ones. Her son was alive, but the cost in every sense of the word was devastating, and this nightmare still wasn't over. The days following the second surgery moved slowly, as if time itself was afraid to rush Evan's healing. The sharp panic of the last week gradually loosened its grip, replaced by a gentler rhythm. Nurses checking vitals, whispered conversations in the hallway, the low hum of hospital machines. For the first time in what felt like forever, Evan's body began to relax, the tension in his small frame easing bit by bit. Sarah sat beside him every day, brushing his hair gently away from the bandage on his head, watching the color return to his cheeks. Sometimes he woke confused or scared, calling for her, and she was always there, her voice soft, her hand warm, her presence steady as an anchor. Other times Evan would ask questions she struggled to answer. Why did this happen to him? Was it gone forever? Would it come back? She answered every question the same way. You're getting stronger every day, and we're right here with you. Mike spent every hour he could at the hospital after his shifts at the fire station. He brought Evan his favorite comic books, sat beside the bed reading them out loud in over-the-top superhero voices, making Evan laugh for the first time since this nightmare began. The sound was small and breathy, but it lifted something heavy in Sarah's chest. Lily visited too, always with a drawing clutched in her tiny hands. Every picture showed Evan as a superhero, sometimes with a cape, sometimes with a glowing shield, always smiling. "You're the strongest person I know," she told him proudly one afternoon, climbing onto the chair beside his bed. "Stronger than Daddy, stronger than Captain America." Evan smiled shyly, his fingers brushing over her picture. "I don't feel strong." "That's because you're healing," Lily said in a matter-of-fact tone that only 6-year-olds could manage. "Mom says healing is the hardest thing." Sarah's chest tightened at the truth of those words. Each day, Evan grew a little stronger. He could sit up longer, he could walk a few steps, he could hold down meals without nausea. Nurses praised his progress, calling him our little fighter. Dr. Ramirez visited often, checking incisions, reviewing labs, and offering cautiously optimistic updates. The infections were clearing. The inflammation was decreasing. Evan's scans looked better every day. "You're through the worst of it," Ramirez said during one visit, resting a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Now it's just time and recovery." Sarah nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you. For everything." "This boy did the fighting," Ramirez replied softly. "Not me." One evening, as the Texas sunset painted the hospital windows in soft orange, Sarah pulled Evan's bed closer to the window so he could see the sky. They watched the fading light together in comfortable silence. Evan leaned his head against her arm, breathing calmly. "Mom?" he whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think things will go back to normal?" Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I think things will be different, but different doesn't mean bad. We'll make a new normal. Together." Evan nodded, his small hand reaching for hers. "I'm glad you didn't let me go." Sarah kissed his forehead, her voice barely a whisper. "I never will." For the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope, real, steady hope, that her little boy was coming back to her, piece by fragile piece. Sarah had never been the kind of person who posted videos online. She barely used social media except to share birthday photos of the kids or the occasional family trip to the lake. But the night before Evan was discharged, after the nurses dimmed the hospital lights and the hallway grew quiet, she sat alone in the visitor's chair with her phone in her trembling hands and a heaviness on her chest she could no longer ignore. Evan slept peacefully beside her, curled beneath blankets that still smelled faintly of antiseptic. His scars, one hidden beneath his hairline, the other a small mark on his thigh, were healing. But Sarah knew healing didn't erase the truth of what happened. It didn't erase how close she had come to losing him. It didn't erase the fact that another parent, somewhere, might be ignoring a bump right now the same way she once had. And so she opened the camera app. Her face appeared on the screen, pale and tired, eyes still swollen from days of crying. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the record button. Part of her feared judgment, part of her feared she would break down on camera. But a bigger part of her feared what would happen if she stayed silent. She hit record. "My name is Sarah Miller," she began softly. "And 3 weeks ago, I almost lost my son because I thought a bump on his head was nothing." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She leaned forward, letting the raw truth pour out. "I kept telling myself it would go away, that it was just swelling, that kids get hurt. And I didn't want to drag him to the ER and get hit with a bill we couldn't afford. That's the truth." She swallowed hard and looked at Evan, sleeping peacefully beside her. But that bump wasn't nothing. It was alive. It was a parasite. And by the time we got him to the hospital, it was almost too late. She lifted the camera to show Evan's bandaged head gently, careful not to reveal anything graphic. Her voice softened. "He's okay now. He's healing. But if we had waited one more day, we wouldn't be here." Sarah talked about the symptoms: persistent itching, warmth, swelling that didn't fade. She described the field trip to the greenhouse, the tropical exhibit, the information the CDC had shared. She spoke calmly, honestly, without dramatizing anything. The truth was dramatic enough. Then her voice grew firmer, stronger. "I'm sharing this because I don't want any parent to make the same mistake I did. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Don't wait. Don't hope it will go away. I know healthcare in America is expensive and broken and terrifying, but ignoring it is even more terrifying. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't wipe them away. Please, pay attention to your kids' bodies, trust your instincts, and take them to the doctor. I almost didn't, and it nearly cost my son his life. She ended the recording, her hands finally shaking. When she hit upload, she had no idea the video would spread across the country within hours. No idea millions of parents would watch it in stunned silence. No idea hospitals would receive calls from frantic families asking about mysterious bumps. No idea her warning would become the spark that turned one child's nightmare into a national conversation. But in that quiet hospital room, with her son sleeping peacefully beside her, Sarah felt a small, steady sense of purpose. If their suffering could save even one child, then none of it was in vain. Evan was discharged on a quiet Thursday afternoon, the Texas sky clear and warm as Sarah wheeled him through the hospital's sliding glass doors. The sunlight touched his face gently, the first real warmth he'd felt outside in weeks. He closed his eyes, breathing it in as if relearning what fresh air tasted like. Sarah watched him with a swelling heart, grateful, exhausted, and still terrified to let him out of her sight. Mike pulled the car around, fastening Evan's seatbelt with more care than he had ever used in his life. When he kissed the top of his son's head, his voice cracked. "Home," he whispered. "We're finally going home." The car ride was quiet, peaceful. Evan stared out the window, watching houses and trees blur by, as if seeing the world with new eyes, a world that had kept spinning even while he'd been trapped in a nightmare. Sarah reached back to squeeze his hand. He squeezed back weakly, but it was enough. When they arrived home, Lily barreled down the driveway, arms wide and tears streaming. "Evan!" she squealed, nearly knocking him off balance as she wrapped him in a tight hug. Evan laughed, wincing a little, but he hugged her right back. Inside, the house felt different, not because anything had changed, but because everything had. The walls, the furniture, the toys scattered across the living room floor. It all looked like a world they had almost lost. That evening, as they sat together on the couch, Evan curled between his parents, watching cartoons with a tired but content smile. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a quiet strength, a new clarity. The fear was still there, it always would be, but it no longer controlled her. Later, after the kids were asleep, Mike stood beside her on the back porch, the warm night breeze brushing past them. "Do you think we'll ever stop being scared?" he asked softly. Sarah looked up at the stars, clear, bright, steady. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe we don't have to stop being scared. Maybe we just have to keep moving anyway." Mike nodded, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "He's a fighter," he said. "Just like his mom." She leaned against him, her eyes stinging. "We all fought, together." The next morning, her video had surpassed 10 million views. News outlets requested interviews. Pediatricians shared her warning. Schools across the country began inspecting greenhouses and class pets. Parents booked checkups for their children. And the CDC announced a nationwide study into emerging parasitic threats in warmer, changing climates. Sarah read every comment from parents thanking her, from mothers who said her story pushed them to take their child's symptoms seriously, from fathers who admitted they'd been too afraid of medical bills to seek help. She cried through most of them. Later, she walked into Evan's room. He was sitting at his desk, drawing, not bugs this time, but a picture of their family, holding hands under a bright sun. He looked up at her. "Mom, are we safer now?" Sarah knelt beside him, brushing a hand through his hair as her heart filled with a quiet, unwavering truth. "We're safer," she said softly, "because we know more now. Because we're paying attention. Because we're not alone." Evan smiled, pressing the drawing into her hands, and for the first time since the nightmare began, Sarah felt something pure and steady bloom in her chest. Hope. Bright, fragile, but real. The kind that grows only after surviving the dark.